Thinking of exiting your business or taking on a private equity partner to help you grow faster? BizNexus has you covered. Tap into our network of thousands of best-fit investors, acquirers, and proven M&A advisors, and we'll help you begin the relationship confidentially on your terms, your timeline. Learn more at biznexus.com.
Disclaimer from the always present legal team. Podcast conversations don't necessarily reflect the views of BizNexus Incorporated. Everything you hear is informational news and updates from around the industry. We're not recommending any investments. We're not offering any investment advice. Be sure to do your own homework.
All right, let's take a look at this report on seller notes you sent over. We're talking about, those deals in the $2 to $50 million range. I know that's kind of your sweet spot right now.
Yeah, it is. Seller financing, it comes up more often than you'd think, especially in this market.
Oh yeah, I bet. It's not always easy to get, like traditional bank loans for these mid-sized businesses. So maybe for folks listening who are new to this, could you just give us like a quick rundown of what a seller note even is in this context?
Sure. Basically, think of it as the seller kind of becoming the bank in a way. They're financing a chunk of that sale price. So the buyer makes payments to them, over time, usually with interest. It's kind of like an extra layer on top of everything else in M&A.
Gotcha. So it was kind of like another way to get the deal done when maybe the traditional financing isn't quite there. But why would both sides even want to do this? It doesn't seem, I don't know, a little risky for both the buyer, A&D, the seller?
Well, it can be, but there are some definite upsides if it's done right. For the buyer, think about it. Imagine trying to buy a company, but you can't get all the funding from a bank. A seller note could bridge that gap and make the acquisition possible. And sometimes the terms are actually better than what a bank would give you.
So it's kind of like getting a little advantage in a tight market.
Yeah, exactly. Now, on the flip side, for the seller, it's often about attracting more buyers. When you offer seller financing, it opens the door to folks who might not have like all the cash on hand right this second, but they have a good plan for the business.
That makes sense. And I guess if you really believe in the buyer and their vision, it could be a way to get a better price for your company since you're making it easier to buy in the first place.
Right. And, let's not forget the potential for a steady stream of income from the interest on the note. The report actually had a good example of this in manufacturing. A business owner sold their company for, say, $10 million. They agreed to finance $2 million of that with a seller note at 6% interest over 5 years.
Okay, so on top of the $8 million they got up front, they're also pulling in $112,000 a year for those 5 years, just from the interest. Not bad at all.
Yeah, exactly. It can be a win-win if both sides are smart about it.
All right, so we've got a sense of why seller notes can be appealing. But let's dive into the details here, because I'm guessing the terms can get pretty complicated. What are some of the things people really need to understand before even considering this route?
You're right. Details are key. The report zeroes in on 3 terms that are just crucial: the interest rate, the repayment schedule, and the default provisions.
Yeah, let's unpack those one by one. Starting with that interest rate. How is that even determined? It's not like they just pull a number out of thin air, right?
No. Think of the interest rate as a reflection of like the risk the seller is taking on by financing part of the deal. They're looking at things like the buyer's credit, how stable the business is, what's going on in the market in general. The riskier it seems, the higher the rate they're going to want.
So if I'm a buyer with good credit, a solid plan, I could probably negotiate a lower rate.
You got it. It's a good incentive for buyers to be upfront about their financials and have things organized. Now, the repayment schedule is another big piece. It's basically how and when the buyer's going to repay that principal and interest.
And I'm assuming there's some flexibility there.
Oh, yeah. You've got your classic amortization schedule where the payments are spread out evenly, but you also have things like balloon payments where you have smaller payments at first and then a big lump sum at the end.
So choosing the right repayment schedule, it depends on the deal, the financial situation of everyone involved.
Yeah, right. Like, say a buyer is expecting big growth in a few years. They might like a balloon payment so they can keep more cash on hand early on. A seller who wants a quicker return, they might push for shorter amortization.
It's kind of like a dance, figuring out what steps work for everyone.
That's a good way to put it. And then, of course, there are those default provisions. Those are the clauses that spell out what happens if the buyer, for whatever reason, can't make their payments.
Ah, so this is the hope for the best but prepare for the worst part of the deal. What kind of things would typically be in those provisions?
It varies, but a common one is giving the seller the right to take back ownership of the business if the buyer defaults. Or they might be able to seize some assets of the business as collateral. It's about protecting the seller's investment, ultimately.
Yeah, it seems like those default provisions, that's where things can get, real. It's all good until payment's missed.
Well, hopefully it never gets to that point. But yeah, you're right. Those provisions, they're there to lay out a clear path if things go wrong.
And that's where having a good lawyer is crucial, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. They can make sure all the language is clear, enforceable, protects your interests.
It's like having a good guide when you're in the middle of the legal jungle.
Yeah, I like that. Now let's shift gears a bit. Talk about the power dynamics in these negotiations. Who usually has the upper hand with seller notes? Is it always a battle?
That's a good question. I can see it getting, pretty tense, especially with so much money on the line.
It can be, but it doesn't have to be win or lose. Ideally, both sides come to the table, ready to work together, understanding that a good deal is good for everybody. But to answer your question, sellers with strong financials, a business that's doing well, they often have more leverage.
Makes sense. If your business is in demand, you've got more say in the terms.
Exactly. But even then, transparency is key. Sellers need to be open about the business, building trust with the potential buyers. Buyers need to be upfront about their own finances, and their plans for the company.
So it's more about finding an agreement that works for everyone, not trying to outsmart the other guy.
Yeah. Think of it as a partnership, not a power struggle.
The report actually talked about that partnership idea. They highlighted this case study in the software industry where a seller used a seller note with what they called a stepped interest rate.
Oh, yeah. That's an interesting approach. Instead of a fixed interest rate for the whole term of the note, the rate starts lower and then it gradually increases over time.
So why would a seller do that? It seems like they'd be losing out on money by starting lower.
Well, it can actually be a win-win for the buyer. Those early payments are easier to handle, especially if they're growing the business and need to watch their cash flow. And for the seller, it encourages the buyer to perform well.
Because if the business is doing great, they're more likely to be okay with those higher interest payments later on.
Right. It aligns their incentives, creates a shared interest in seeing the business succeed.
That's a really clever way to structure a seller note. It shows there's a lot of room to be creative, to be flexible with these agreements.
Absolutely. There's no one right way to do it. It's about finding what works in each specific deal, for the people involved.
Speaking of finding what works, I want to bring up something that I think sometimes gets overlooked in these discussions, and that's the emotional side of these M&A deals. Selling a business that you built, or buying one hoping to take it to the next level. Those are big decisions, a lot of personal investment there.
You're absolutely right. That human element, you can't ignore it. For sellers, it can be a really, really emotional process. They built this business. It's their baby. Letting go is tough.
Yeah, it's like closing a chapter in their life.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's a chapter that ends on a good note.
Yeah, exactly. And for buyers, it's important to be sensitive to that, to understand that legacy they're stepping into. They need to balance their own vision with the values and the things that made the business successful in the first place.
It's about finding that balance between honoring the past and looking to the future.
You said it. And seller notes, when they're done right, they can actually help with that. They create this sense of continuity. The seller can stay involved, maybe as a mentor, or even keep a small ownership stake.
It's like building a bridge between different generations of entrepreneurs. The seller's legacy continues and the buyer gets a head start on their journey.
I like that. And it reminds me of something the report mentioned about about due diligence, especially for buyers.
Oh yeah, we talked about that earlier in terms of sellers checking out potential buyers, but it's just as important for buyers to do their homework on the business they're buying.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to go beyond just the numbers, understand the market, assess the management team, look for any potential problems. It's about getting a complete picture of the company before you invest in it.
Like getting a full checkup before you commit to a long-term relationship.
Exactly. You don't want any surprises later on. And that's another area where a good lawyer is so valuable. They can help you navigate all the complexities of due diligence and protect yourself.
So we've talked about the benefits of seller notes, the key terms, the negotiation back and forth, the due diligence piece, even the emotional stuff. Are there any common pitfalls, things people should watch out for when they're dealing with seller notes, like red flags?
That's a good question. One of the biggest ones I see is just a lack of clear communication. Both sides got to be upfront about their expectations,
Yeah.
their financial limits, their willingness to compromise. If there's anything that's not being said, any hidden agendas, it can really mess things up.
So honesty and transparency are key, even if it means having some tough conversations early on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's better to deal with potential problems head on than to let them, fester and maybe blow up the whole deal later. Another common pitfall is rushing the process. Seller nights can be complicated. It takes time to structure them properly, to negotiate the terms.
So patience is a virtue in these deals.
It really is. Don't let yourself be pressured into making a decision before you're ready. Take your time, do your due diligence, talk to your advisors, make sure you're making an informed decision.
It's like that saying, measure twice, cut once.
Exactly. And finally, I'd say a lack of legal expertise can be a major pitfall. Seller notes, their legal agreements, there's a lot of nuances. Having a good lawyer on your team can make all the difference in making sure the agreement is fair, it's enforceable, it protects you.
So finding the right legal counsel, it's like having a good compass when you're out in the wilderness of M&A.
I couldn't have said it better myself. They can help you avoid those pitfalls,
Yeah.
navigate the tough legal stuff, make sure the deal is structured the right way for everyone involved.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but before we wrap up, is there anything else our listeners should keep in mind as they navigate the world of seller notes? Any final pearls of wisdom?
Yeah.
That's good advice. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a deal and forget about those things, the due diligence, the lawyers. But let's talk about something we haven't really gotten into yet. How do you even figure out a fair interest rate for a seller note? It doesn't seem like there's like a magic formula or anything.
You're right. There isn't, but there are some guidelines. Remember, the interest rate, it's basically the seller's way of getting paid for the risk they're taking by financing part of this deal.
So the higher the risk, the higher the rate.
Yeah. And that risk, well, a lot of things can affect it. The buyer's credit is a big one. If they've got a good financial history, the seller's probably going to feel better about offering a lower rate.
But if the buyer is, a brand new company, not much history, then the seller's going to want more interest to balance out that uncertainty.
Exactly. And then you have to think about the business itself. Is it in a steady industry, or is it more up and down? What's the potential for growth? All those things play into how risky it seems.
And of course, you can't forget about the overall economy. If interest rates are going up everywhere, that's gonna affect seller note negotiations too, right?
Oh, for sure. It's all connected.
So it sounds like figuring out a fair interest rate, it's more of an art than a science.
In a way, yeah, there's no one right answer. But I think the important thing is for both sides to be open about what they want and why. The seller should be able to explain, why they're asking for a certain rate, and the buyer should be ready to explain why they think a lower rate makes sense.
So it's about finding that middle ground where everyone feels like it's a fair deal.
Exactly. Now, another area where I see people struggle is just with the negotiation itself. They're either, too afraid to to ask for what they want and they end up getting a bad deal, or they're too pushy and they blow up the whole thing.
So what's the trick to negotiating these seller note terms, effectively?
Well, first of all, be prepared. Do your homework. Understand your own financial situation, your goals for the deal, what similar businesses are worth. Knowledge is power, especially when you're negotiating.
So it's not about just winging it. It's about coming in prepared.
Right. And remember, the goal isn't to win the negotiation. It's to come to an agreement that works for everybody. You got to be willing to listen to the other side, to compromise, to find, creative solutions that address everyone's needs.
Yeah, it's about building a bridge, not burning one down.
I like that.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to something we talked about before. The emotional side of these deals. Selling a business, it can be really emotional, especially if it's something you've put your heart and soul into. What advice would you give to sellers who are struggling with that part of it, with letting go?
I think it's important to acknowledge those emotions. Don't try to, push them down or pretend they're not there. Selling a business, it's a big deal, and it's natural to feel a lot of things: sadness, pride, anxiety, excitement, all of it.
So give yourself permission to feel all the feels.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to reach out to people you trust for support. Talk to your family, your friends, your mentors, whoever. Share how you're feeling. Get their perspective. It can really help.
And for buyers, what advice would you give them about dealing with all of that?
I think the key is to be respectful. Understand that you're not just buying a business. You're taking on a legacy. Take the time to learn about the company's history, its values, its culture. Talk to the employees. Understand their point of view.
It's about honoring the past while you're building the future.
Exactly. And if you can do that, you're not just making a good business deal. You're creating something much bigger.
That's a great point. Seller notes, when they're done right, they can be more than just financial tools. They can be a way to make positive change, to work together, to create something that lasts.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, I think we've really covered a lot today. We explored the benefits of seller notes, the key terms to understand the ins and outs of negotiating, the importance of due diligence and having a good lawyer, and even the emotional side of it all. I hope our listener feels like they know more about seller notes and can make smart decisions that work for their goals.
Me too. And remember, if you're ever feeling lost or unsure about something, don't hesitate to reach out to an expert, a good M&A advisor or lawyer. They can be a huge help. They can guide you through all the complicated stuff and help you make the best choices for your situation.
That's great advice. And with that, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back soon with another interesting topic from the world of business.
It's been a pleasure.
Acquiring a business? BizNexus simplifies it. Access thousands of updated opportunities in our DIY marketplace or supercharge team sourcing with OmniSource, your all-in-one platform for on-market, off-market, and coming-soon deals. Scale smarter today. Learn more or book a demo at www.biznexus.com.